Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Monday, July the 14th, at the start of Rachel Reeves Reboot Week. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in 20 minutes. And if you haven't made us part of your morning routine by now, please do follow the podcast.
Now, there's just over a week left of sitting days before recess, summer recess in the Commons. And that means that there's just over a week left of the daily editions of this podcast. But we've got something new for you, an innovation, Anne. Every week over the summer, we're going to drop an episode looking at the term ahead in British politics in a different subject. It's kind of deep dives of public services, Britain and the world, the economy and public finances. So when you're back in September, you are fully briefed, just as normal, but in a new way.
You could think of us like a podcast box set. You could top up from your sun lounger, episode by episode, or you could guzzle us in one go before you need to go back to work at the end of August and get you into the politics zone again when the new term looms, because events are going to come thick and fast in September.
Not least the second state visit from Donald Trump, which was confirmed overnight by Buckingham Palace. That's going to take place September the 17th to September the 19th, which means it'll be sandwiched somewhere between that early September Reform UK conference and the Liberal Democrat conference. But critically, and during the mini recess for the conference season, which means that there's the avoidance of the awkward spectacle of the US president addressing Parliament.
Bit of a shame to miss that, isn't it? My Playbook colleagues are also reporting that this is happening with MPs safely out of town, and that dials down a lot of possible heat around the visit. He could address the Lords, which will be sitting, but it doesn't feel so likely. Picture, if you will. I knew that would appeal to you. This will be President Trump's second state visit to the UK after his first in 2019. Also, his second visit in a matter of weeks this summer, because he's coming at the end of this month to visit his golf courses. We think the week of around July the 28th, the Scottish papers suggesting he's going to visit all three of his courses and potentially meeting Keir Starmer and John Swinney then. Please, can listeners supply the right golf metaphor for me to use next time on this?
Let me help you, Anne. The US president's capacity to swing things, boom, boom, continues overnight. Today, we're waiting for a new plan from Donald Trump to arm Ukraine. Big shift, this, it feels like, that will include offensive weapons. Senator Lindsey Graham says that Trump is really pissed at Vladimir Putin. His announcement is going to be very aggressive. Now, all of that comes after a call between Putin and Trump last week. I'm really interested in where you think this all comes out in the wash. And Trump has zigzagged over the question of Putin and Ukraine ever since he returned to the White House. Is this a serious shift? Does this mark something that Putin will pay attention to, or does the Russian president just sort of brush off this change of tone, because it does happen quite a lot?
That's going to be really interesting to see. It also depends on what is delivered, doesn't it, by Donald Trump. I mean, he's gone out there at the weekend talking about Patriot missiles, and he says, which Ukraine desperately needs, but has also needed them for all the time the US was holding back and signaling it wasn't going to get involved materially with the defense of Ukraine anymore. So have things really changed, or is this a kind of brotherly spat with the Kremlin? My own reading, I think it is an unraveling of the US attempts to end the war in Ukraine via a ceasefire, big, beautiful ceasefire, which would have put Donald Trump, as he saw it, on that road to the Nobel Peace Prize. And he could have said he'd made a real difference there. I think he realized over time that Vladimir Putin was not remotely serious about that. He wants to press on in Ukraine. He has military goals. He has an ideological take on Ukraine, that it needs to come back into the Russian family and effectively run at arm's length from Moscow. So that's not going to change. What could change, and as you say, it depends really how the Kremlin responds as well, is if the administration is signaling this disillusionment with Vladimir Putin's refusal to negotiate. Does that mean that Kyiv can be emboldened to change tack in the war? It's been on the back foot for rather obvious reasons. They're now talking about attacks going deep into Russia territory. They can do that far more safely for their own troops and civilians with Patriot air defense cover. But it really depends. You've got to send quite a bit of this. If it's just symbolic, well, that could be a spat. If it's more, then I think it's a real shift. You might be interested to know that this is fully absent from the Kremlin website this morning, which is focused on okay, my favorite. You were missing it, weren't you? I've been missing checking in on it, which is focused on the top story still from yesterday, which is focused on welcoming us to Irkutsk in Siberia to the International Silk Way Rally, one of the most difficult auto races in the world. So priorities can differ. And they've also got a new transport minister. The last one got ousted for corruption and then shot himself in a car because stuff happens.
Domestic concerns and, frankly, domestic political techniques may differ, if I'm being honest. And I'm going to take us right back to Westminster. Today, it looks like we're at the start of Rachel Reeves' relaunch week. It's the first sustained set of appearances since that tearful appearance in the Commons. Since then, she's done just one pool interview. That was with Channel 5's Andy Bell. But now she is out and about properly this week. She's in the Northwest, launching a new initiative to help some of the poorest in society. She's doing a round of interviews for local media, a pool clip, and then tomorrow it's her Mansion House speech, which looks at which is a sort of address to financiers, bankers, and other people in the square mile. So it's best foot forward for the next few days for her.
Yeah, it feels like shiny shoes outings for Rachel Reeves, doesn't it? A much more upbeat presentation to try to water down those memories of her tearful appearance in the Commons not long ago. Now, today's announcement is a £500 million fund intended to help up to 200,000 vulnerable children, called the Better Futures Fund. The Treasury says it will provide support for struggling families and give those children access to better education and a safe home over the next 10 years. It's a partnership with the private sector, but they are keen to point out much simpler than those public finance initiative contracts that bedeviled the last Labour government. Labour MPs desperately wanting more support for low-income families. But Sam, this wasn't what they really want, which is $3 billion needed to abolish the two-child benefit cap. And it's been made pretty clear by Rachel Reeves and her allies that there is no money left for that.
And I think it's being made pretty clear by Labour MPs that they're not going to give up campaigning. And watch this space, by the way, over Labour conference. I think that there is the potential for trouble, but potentially sort of stirred up by Gordon Brown in the background, who believes that the two-child benefit cap is the root of a lot of the child poverty in this country and is going to go all out to tackle it. Let's get back into the big picture politics of Rachel Reeves in a moment, but I'm very struck by one element of the rollout of this plan, Anne, which is in The Guardian this morning, because it's not Rachel Reeves who is the person who is sort of raising the curtain on it, but her Deputy Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Darren Jones. And he talks extensively about how this fund and initiatives like it are very, very personal to him. And it's really quite a personal interview, as it happens, with Heather Stewart, the economics editor. And I'm quite struck, as it happens, that he makes it sound like it's him rather than Rachel Reeves who's the driving force behind it. Now, I can almost hear Darren Jones, if he was listening to this, saying, "Oh, Sam, you're just talking tittle-tattle." But there we go. I've said it anyway, because I bet you that was in part his cheeky intention. And even more pertinently, he was unashamedly sort of boosting and talking up New Labour and his New Labour credentials, which is just not a phrase that you hear government ministers talking about anymore at the moment. New Labour being a sort of code word for Blairism, and the sort of Tony Blair approach. It wasn't something even that Gordon Brown loved at points, although he did ultimately adopt that mantra. He was saying the council estate I grew up on was one of those neighbourhoods that was picked by the New Labour government, because it was so deprived, essentially, in terms of income and educational outcomes. So he's attributing his success in life specifically to Blairite initiatives, and is now looking to do and to give some of that help for others. And that phrase, New Labour, comes up multiple times in the interview. it feels like positioning. It feels like he is planting a big New Labour flag. Again, I'm sure that Darren would call all of that tittle tattle. But I have to be honest, Anne, I think that Darren is one of the best media performers in the cabinet, even if he's not necessarily one of the most popular people amongst his cabinet colleagues. But he doesn't do these things by accident, and it will be noticed. And a lot of things that Darren does is noticed, not least because, and I'm going to grit my teeth and say it because I'm sure they'll be irritated by this, but he is a much better media performer than his boss, Rachel Reeves.
Gone and made yourself popular this morning, haven't you? I think your point there about it being a new Labour flag, that is interesting because I read it more like a revival of a modernised Gordon Brownism, the prudence message on debt that he drives home. We just can't keep on borrowing and borrowing. Sorry, Labour MPs, for all the things that you want. It's really bad to have this 100% of GDP debt ratio. The social impact initiatives, you're right, that he praises, the one that he benefited from as a child and wants to talk about also in that Guardian interview, the return of a new generation of public-private partnerships to fund these neighbourhood health centres at the heart of Wes Streeting's 10-year plan for the NHS. It will set some hairs running that this is PFI under, if you like, a newer Labour branding. But whether it's a TB tribute or a GB one, and I still tend to see Team Reeves as a bit more derivative of Gordonology on the whole, it is a curtain raiser to a very important week for the Chancellor. As you point out, he seems to have a bit of a sort of mojo of his own, but for now, it's going to be Reeves who's back in the eye of the storm, isn't it?
It is. It was interesting. He does actually talk about Rachel Reeves in that interview, and whilst he is the guy pushing this anti-child poverty and anti-poverty strategy, he says what Rachel is trying to do is walk that tightrope out of the kind of fiscal headache that they've got. In other words, I'm the guy with the good news, while my boss is trying to navigate this incredibly difficult, not particularly popular path that's not gonna please anybody. It's almost like I'm the guy with the sweeties, but she's not. That's probably overstating it, but certainly I was struck by the way he talked about her. You talk about Team Reeves. It all depends whether or not you think that Darren Jones is actually on the same ideological page as Rachel Reeves. I'm not totally sure. I think instinctively he's a little bit more to the right of her in Labour terms, but we will see. What Rachel Reeves won't be able to avoid, Anne, is of course a discussion about what taxes are going to be raised. Heidi Alexander, the new-ish transport secretary, was out and about, not least on Trevor's programme on Sky yesterday, and she was very conspicuously refusing to take wealth taxes off the table when she was asked about it by Trevor. She said that they weren't directly discussed at an cabinet away day last week, and that sort of slightly curious formulation, which sort of leans into it, has made a lot of the page ones this morning. Wealth taxes are exactly what Neil Kinnock, the former Labour leader, unions, some MPs have been pushing for. Some kind of tax on unearned income, savings, investments, or property. Now, as it happens, I don't think they've worked out how to fill a black hole left behind by the welfare cuts, capitulation, and lower growth. But as a party management technique, sort of half hinting that you're looking at it, maybe isn't the most stupid idea in the world.
I like the idea of it not being directly discussed, like you should have an indirect discussion about a wealth tax by hinting at it. That might be the problem with that if it is a way of managing backbench sentiment, Sam, because if you raise that, more and more people start to talk about it and then don't deliver it. I wonder what you've gained there, but possibly I'm missing something. I have often thought for quite a long time now that if it's Neil Kinnock suggesting something, particularly in the fiscal space, it's not going to happen. I do think he's in a different place in his head. I do, sorry. Well, no, I mean, I very much enjoy Neil Kinnock's company. I've had many spirited interviews and exchanges with him, but I just don't feel he is where the government is in its gut on this kind of issue. That said, money's going to have to come from somewhere, isn't it? And directly taxing savings and investments, I think, would be quite a tricky path to go down. You can already see the backlash to the possible plan that clearly has been pitch-rolled by Rachel Reeves to cut those ISA thresholds and to radically bring down the amount of the ISA dosh you can stick in there without paying tax on it. But there is a raid coming on better off earners. We all know that. Pension tax relief, I would suggest, is high on that list, and that could be pretty swinging. I'm told by a money manager who deals with these things that the EIS scheme is still pretty safe, as he understands it from the Treasury, because it's getting people invested in UK firms and startups and growth. And I think if Rachel Reeves were to go after that, people would say, well, what is your overall message? You wanted us to put less into ISAs to invest in the British economy. You can't then start to slap us on tax relief there. But that also does cut off a place where people are not, have a bit of money to invest and not paying tax. But the wealth tax as a direct levy, would Keir Starmer want that on his political record going into the next election? I'm not so sure. What do you think?
So one of the interesting things about wealth taxes is that specifically Rachel Reeves seemed to keep ruling them out, right? She's done that in this parliament. She did that in the run-up to the election. So in the light of Heidi Alexander's comments, does she default to what she said before, or does she leave a little bit more wiggle room? I mean, there is a chance that every single front page dies within a matter of hours, right? So I'm actually genuinely interested when this Paul interview happens mid-morning, what happens. Look, the IFS has been very clear that it basically poo-poos wealth taxes as a whole because it's very difficult to create a new form of taxation. How do you assess the asset base against which you're taxing and all the rest of it? We have a wealth tax in this country. That's council tax. This government appears to be sticking to its decision to rule out a reevaluation and a recalibration of that. But so many things feel like they're in the too tricky box for this government, and I haven't yet seen the kind of bravery in any of the various fields and the sort of political might and will that would be needed to get something like this over the line. So I'm thinking that there will be more traditional answers to the problem of how to fill this back hole than a wealth tax when it comes. All over the place, though, this government feels quite hemmed in. Do you remember in the run-up to this government's election, one of the key things they told us was how there was going to be greater reliance on the Office for Budget Responsibility because the OBR wasn't used by Liz Truss before her mini-budget. That blew up.
Oh,
And
yes.
literally, there is a piece of legislation that has gone through Parliament to stop that happening again. Well, now the IMF has come out and said maybe you only need to get the OBR to assess your forecast once a year. And in the papers this morning, there's a whole bunch of Red Wall MPs going, yeah, really, Rachel, you have to dial down your reliance on the OBR. And it sounds like she is minded to maybe go from 2 OBR forecasts to 1 a year, meaning that there's only one moment where she can be judged to have missed her fiscal rules and have to find more money from taxes, spending cuts, or probably not welfare anymore. So so they're running in a sort of opposite direction. All of this just reflects the sort of lack of thinking that happened in opposition, and the fact that they are now forced to sort of recalibrate again and again.
It sure does. I mean, we remember all of those sort of swingy statements that the OBR, how the OBR was critical of the last Tory government, and that, of course, when Labour came to power, there would be fiscal rectitude, and the OBR would be a gold standard. Well, that has certainly been turned into a sort of, we'll listen to the OBR, but not quite so much. I suppose, to be fair, as you use the phrase hemmed in about Rachel Reeves and the government when it comes to matters economic and financial, if something is going to have to change and you change that, so you get a bit, somehow you buy yourself wiggle room there without actually changing your fiscal rules. You could say how many people outside the bubble will really notice that. So, do you know what? I'm really not going to vote Labour anymore because they stopped listening to the OBR twice a year. So there may be a calculation that outside nerd world that they could sort of get away with that and buy themselves some space. Well, I think it's a little bit more. I'd love to hear what you think about that, Sam, because you're a bit of an OBR nerd. But I was just going to chip in before that. The Times Splash is telling today the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey suggesting that he may still be about to make larger cuts to interest rates, rather the bank will, if the job market keeps slowing down, and saying there's consistent evidence of businesses adjusting employment, It's code for cutting jobs. Over national insurance hikes for firms. Another implicit criticism of the government's economic decisions when it came to office.
Yeah, no, it's a weird one on the front page of the Times, because essentially that means good news flows from bad news, if you were to pass it that way. But in the end, I think whether it's the OBR or whether it's somebody else, there will always be economic forecasts, and you can't wish them away. And whether it's 2 forecasts a year or 1 forecast that has to take 12 months adjustment to, for instance, how far you've broken your fiscal rules, meaning there's just a bigger shock once a year rather than 2 smaller shocks twice a year. I'm not sure it either way particularly helps. The alarm has, however, gone off in the seconds that we have left. You asked earlier for an example of an indirect conversation, Anne. I'm going to indirectly raise the possibility that maybe the dog barking in the distance, your end of the recording, is a dog that you would no longer really want to be able to do that. But I'm not going to raise directly what you think should happen to that dog. And on that note,
I'm so sorry. I got so carried away. I missed the dog and I left a window open. So there you go. Highly trained podcast professional. With apologies to all listeners who were wondering about the dog that is definitely barking in the early morning.
Not the only barking things in your ears at this time. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow for Tuesday's Politics at Sam and Anne's. And we will see you then.
Go and deal with the dog now. Cheers.